Many years ago, a meeting was called and representatives from across the land gathered in the Northeast. The way societies had been governing themselves just wasn't working. Some of the most well-respected leaders of the day, military leaders, orators, and politicians were in attendance. They agreed to join their lands together to form a single alliance, establishing one of the oldest democracies in human history. If you think this sounds like the Constitutional Convention, you're not wrong. And don't worry, we'll get to the men in powdered wigs in a bit. What we're really talking about here is the establishment of the Iroquois Confederacy in the 15th century and 17th century, at least 200 years before Washington and his buddies set up shop in Philadelphia. So throw on your snowshoes and get your maple syrup ready, because in this episode, we're heading to the Northeast to learn about some of the indigenous people that continue to call the region home today. I'm Dr. Danielle Bainbridge, and this is Study Hall, U.S. History to 1865. The area we now think of as New York and New England was home to a number of diverse and powerful societies. By around 1100 CE, two sets of distinct Native American cultures were emerging in the area: the Iroquoian and the Algonquian. How we identify and name these cultures matters. First, we say cultures instead of tribes because the Iroquois and the Algonquian were not themselves singular tribes. Rather, they were made up of numerous tribes that shared similar traits such as language, religious practices, and governance, similar to the Mississippian culture from the last episode. These traits make up, in part, what sociologists call culture. So, let's explore. In today's western and northern New York State, 5 tribes dominated the land. These were the Mohawk, or the people of the Flint, Oneida, or the people of the Standing Stone, Onondaga, or the people of the hills, and Cayuga, or the people of the Great Swamp, and the Seneca, or people of the Great Hill. Chances are you might have heard one or more of the names of those tribes. But unlike the Hohokam and ancestral Puebloans, and even the inhabitants of Cahokia, we actually know what these tribes named themselves. They were Kunyankayaka, Onayodeaka, Onondaga, Giocono, and Onodoaga. Why do some of these names sound so different from what we're used to hearing? Well, sometimes it's because the original Europeans who came into contact with these tribes took an unwritten language and usually tried to use the Latin alphabet to spell them. Other times, these are names given to them by a different native group. The cultures that made up the Iroquois didn't call themselves that either. They called themselves the Haudenosaunee, which means people of the Longhouse. Today, that name typically refers to the Confederacy that the Iroquois entered into, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Longhouses refer to the traditional homes of the Iroquois culture, and looked exactly like how they sound. Within each longhouse lived a clan consisting of anywhere between 2 and 20 family units. Inside most longhouses were lofted platforms, usually about 2 feet off the ground, where people slept. These longhouses ranged in size, with some archaeologists finding remains of longhouses longer than the size of an American football field. Most Iroquois villages, sometimes referred to by Europeans as castles, were stockaded, meaning they were surrounded by walls. And the villages were usually made up of roughly 20 to 30 longhouses and were built on hilltops to protect it from invasion. When the Europeans arrived, there may have been around 20,000 Iroquois living in the region, but colonization brought diseases to which the Iroquois had no immunity. Europeans also brought intense and sustained violence, far more deadly than indigenous styles of warfare. Whole villages died. Like our friends in the Southeast, the Haudenosaunee cultivated the 3 sisters: beans, corn, and squash. Haudenosaunee society featured a matrilineal social order, meaning family units generally lived with and moved into the longhouse or village of the woman. In addition, social status of children was conferred by the status of the mother, not the father. Because these cultures were some of the first to encounter Europeans, we actually have a decent understanding of their history, including one of the continent's most important geopolitical events of the time, the formation of the Iroquois Confederacy. People differ on when the Iroquois Confederacy was officially founded. However, many researchers today believe the alliance was established between 1450 and 1600. Some sources place the Confederacy's origin much earlier to align with a solar eclipse in 1142. Others hold that the Confederacy was formed even earlier and may be as many as 2,000 years old. Ah, historians. We're as excited to tell you what we don't know as what we do. Let's dive a little deeper into the what, when, how, and why of the Iroquois Confederacy. In either the 1st, 2nd, 11th, or 14th century, a man known as Oneida, or the Great Peacemaker, was born in the Northeast. Around the same time, significant fighting and conflict between the 5 Iroquois tribes dominated the region. The Great Peacemaker, as you might expect, called for an end to this fighting. The Great Peacemaker found allies in Jigon, an Iroquois woman who became known as Mother of the Nations, and Hiawatha, an Onondagan who was said to be a renowned speaker. Together, the 3 of them helped found the Iroquois Confederacy, which the Great Peacemaker called Haudenosaunee. According to tradition, the name Haudenosaunee was chosen because the goal of the Confederacy would be to act like one of the Iroquois longhouses, where there may be many different families and fireplaces, but they would live in accord under a single roof and under a single united law. According to the tribal agreement, the following would be true. The Confederacy's primary goal would be peace and unity among the tribes. The Confederacy would consist of 50 representatives, known as sachems, chosen by local villages and clans. Each tribe would be granted a single vote on decisions. Any decision made by the Confederacy would be unanimous. While the tribes agreed to enter into this Confederacy, they did not lose their tribal independence and were free to engage in trade or individual war with and against other tribes. Some administrative tasks would be delegated among the tribes, like the Onondaga's responsibility to present matters before the council meetings. The Confederacy established by the Great Peacemaker, Jigon, and Hiawatha helped bring about centuries of peace and forged a meaningful relationship between not only the Iroquois tribes themselves, but the later colonial settlements. While the Iroquois were prominent in western and upstate New York, Algonquian tribes mostly populated coastal areas: Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Manhattan Island. Algonquian refers not to a tribe, but to a linguistic grouping. And while Algonquian languages are spoken throughout what is now the United States, today we'll be focusing on some of the Algonquian peoples who lived in the Northeast. In contrast to the Iroquois, who shared similar cultural practices across different tribes, those united by the Algonquian languages had more differences than similarities. Some, like the Lenape, were matrilineal and fairly egalitarian. They had a leadership structure, but the villagers could overrule any decisions higher-ups made. But the Wampanoag, for instance, are more hierarchical. They operate with a series of sachems, or chiefs, and under-sachems. Many Algonquian tribes built wigwams, or witus, smaller, rounder homes made of tree bark. These were mostly lived in during the warmer spring and summer months. In the winter, these tribes moved into longhouses, similar to the ones used by the Iroquois. And while some clans were able to grow crops, the difficult Northeast climate often made farming a challenge, so other clans generally hunted and fished for their food. So far, we've learned about several different indigenous cultures that populated America long before any Europeans arrived. The Hohokam and ancestral Pueblans in the Southwest, the Cahokia and mound-building societies of the plains and Southeast, and the Iroquois and Algonquian in the Northeast. Clearly, American history does not begin with Christopher Columbus in 1492 or Samuel de Champlain in the 1600s. And Native American history doesn't end with the arrival of Europeans. Indigenous peoples live everywhere in the United States and in every kind of community. They make up significant portions of populations in states including Arizona, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and the Dakotas. The city of Chicago alone has more than 65,000 people who identify as Native American, and they are members of over 150 tribes. But what if we'd chosen to begin this course with the arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1492? Or if we'd started with the first shots at Lexington and Concord in 1775? Would the widespread impact of Native Americans be so obvious? Would it seem as important? Maybe. Or maybe not. We would have left out most of the human history of North America. We would miss the tragedy of colonization and fail to see the courage, adaptation, and resilience of Native peoples. And because settlers entered a world made by Native Americans, and in many cases only survived the first years of colonization because of Native help, we wouldn't understand settlers' history either. And there's still so much we don't know. Like, for example, what the Hohokam people called themselves, or why the huge settlement at Cahokia broke apart, or when the Great Peacemaker helped found the Iroquois Confederacy. And while it's okay that we don't know, it shouldn't stop us from searching, exploring the record, conducting interviews to understand oral history, and going out and asking questions. That's how history is made. It's how we make sure the stories we tell about the past actually line up to what happened. Let's keep that in mind as we turn our attention to European settlement of America in the episodes to come. Thanks for watching Study Hall U.S. History to 1865, which is part of the Study Hall Project, a partnership between ASU and Crash Course. If you like this video and want to keep learning with us, be sure to subscribe. You can learn more about Study Hall and the videos produced by Crash Course and ASU in the links in the description. See you next time.